My name is Alan Good, and aviation is a wonderful career, a wonderful hobby, or something great just to do occasionally. My first interest in aviation came back in 1963. There was a gentleman named Jim Peterson, taught school in Stillwell School, and he owned this particular airplane that I have, which is a 1946 Aranca Champ. His thing was to put a problem on the board Fridays, and whoever came in with the answer to that problem on Mondays would get a free airplane ride. He gave probably 1,000 to 1,500 students a ride in that airplane, and my name and my brother's name is in his logbook in August of 1963. That was my first ride. After that, I really didn't get into aviation very much. The next step into my career was the military. I went to Vietnam. After my brother got drafted, I thought I should go in also. The military kind of directed me into the aviation, into helicopters, flying helicopters. So I didn't really participate in aviation until I got through the military, and they put me through all the helicopter training and also gave me the opportunity to get my private license to fly commercially or even private. I spent a career of 40 years actually in the military, 20 of which was active flying. After that, I went into EMS flying for the hospital, Parkview Hospital in Fort Wayne. That was an exciting career. Ended up with about 7,000 hours worth of flight time. Now, I've taken trips in airplanes. With the Champ, we haven't gone too far because it's a low and slow airplane. Being 1946, you want to take it nice and easy with something like that. But I also was in another aircraft, and both these aircraft was a group of people that got together and enjoyed flying. The other aircraft was actually a Cherokee 180. The four of us that was in that group flew it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for one of their open house museum visits. That was a terrific flight over, a great visit to the museum, and a really good flight back. The Champ, with the 5 people in it, it makes it a lot easier to afford to fly, and this type of thing is starting to get more and more popular throughout the airfields in the country. You get 3 or 4 or 5 guys together, and you support the airplane with a lot less money that you would need to by yourself. The fun that I had with it was with groups of people, flying to dinners, flying to lunches, and meeting with all the other aviation people. When I came back from Vietnam in '72, Jim Peterson knew that I flew, so he asked me if I would fly the airplane for him. You have to keep the seals fresh. So keeping it flying keeps the seals fresh, keeps it from leaking oil and all the other things. So I told him I could fly if he would fly with me. I didn't feel I should fly it alone without taking him, since he took so many students for a ride. So we did that for about 2 years, and then he decided to sell the airplane and told me I had the first opportunity, at which point I says, another 5-guy organization to support that aircraft. So we got 4 of the guys together, and that's the way it is today. Today there's 5 people in the aircraft. The flight time is cheaper than you would if you would rent one yourself, but we also have fixed costs that we divide up and pay for. I've lived in La Porte all my life, so the times that I've been out to the airport, of course, the original time in 1963, and some other times just passing through, and really didn't get involved with the local Aero Club here until I was back from Vietnam and established with the Cherokee 180 and the 5 group. So that was about 1975 or so. And I've been in the Aero Club ever since, which is a great group of people. I've been through the board of directors, was a president 1 year. And at the Aero Club, we have one of our main goals is to support aviation in the events that the airport here has, and also in the education possibilities or opportunities for the people in the club and the scholarships that we give to other people who are going to school for aviation. We've done well at that. We've had some good people that have donated some money to the club to help it be successful. And there's a lot of good people in the club that volunteer for the pancake breakfast that we have annually, which supports the scholarships. When I was out of the military in 1972, I did some other jobs for quite a while and then got interested in aviation more and more. I was also looking for an aviation job as a helicopter pilot, but at that time the pay wasn't really all that good, and I could make more money and afford to rent an airplane rather than get in as a pilot. But as time went on, I built hours enough to be hired into an EMS job. And the Parkview Hospital in Fort Wayne hired me in 2000. I was a two-pilot group that was hired for a 24-hour program. They had been running for a year prior to that, and they just changed to a 24-hour program. So they hired two of us. We went down to Pittsburgh to do our training and came back and flew a Dolphin 365. It's a lot different than the Champ. The Champ, you have to see where you're going and feel everything you do about flying. With the Dolphin, it's fully automated. It'll do an ILS approach down to 50 feet, and then it'll stop at 50 feet until you push a button and tell it to quit. During that career, a 15-year career there, we did a lot of different things. We went to some places that made the nurses cry with the people who we picked up. I tried to stay out of their business because they do the miracles in the back, and all I do is do the bus driving. The helicopter is completely IFR, complete autopilot on it, so it makes it pretty easy to get to where we need to go and get patients to a hospital that they need to go to quickly. There was one experience that I had which was exceptionally rememberable. During 9/11, they shut down all the aviation in the country. There was nobody flying. They called us up and says, "We will try and get you flying as quickly as we can." So NASA got involved in it, and they came back to us within a couple hours and they said, "This is what you need to do. You need to get all Social Security's numbers and the numbers of the aircraft and the names of all the people. And when you need to go somewhere for an emergency call, you call NASA, give them that information, and they will give you a discrete squawk code, which is a radar indication of who you are." And I'm thinking, this is going to take hours, and it's not going to be good for the patient. But they really got it going, and within 5 minutes, they would get us a number and we could get going. It was pretty strange back then because there was nobody in the air. Normally you would hear a lot of chatter on the radios with people calling the hospitals or people calling the towers or people calling one plane to another, but it was dead silent. The next day I was off, and they called me because we had a spare aircraft at the time, and that aircraft needed to go to Chicago. We borrowed it while ours was being repaired, and then Chicago was going to use it while theirs was being repaired. So since I was off, they asked if I would fly it from Rochester, Indiana, to Chicago, to University Hospital in Chicago. So I says, "Yeah, but I'd like my wife to go along." Well, that was fine with them as long as I'd take it. So the wife and I jumped on a motorcycle, and we rode down to Rochester, which is about an hour, jumped in the airplane, or the helicopter, after getting it all ready to go, took off and flew into Chicago, and I flew through Gary. Gary people are really nice over there. They talked to us for about 10 minutes because there was nothing else going on. It was dead silent out there. So then we got up to Chicago, and I circled the hospital and looked for obstacles and stuff, and I told the wife, I says, "This is where we're landing, right down there." Pointed down to the helipad, and she says, "It's only this big." So we started our approach, landed there, avoided several wires and stuff that they have in the area, and then the gentleman from the University Hospital came out and greeted us. He took us to a train in Chicago there. We jumped on a train, rode into Michigan City. My sister came into Michigan City with her car and took us back home. It was trains, buses, planes, and whatever you want. But that was quite the day. When we're out there and we get calls, sometimes it's a hospital-to-hospital call. And that's pretty straightforward. We go to a hospital, and they normally have a place for us to land. We land, the crew goes in, they get the patient ready to go, they bring them out, load them up, and we fly to the next higher care hospital. Occasionally we had to go to accident scenes, and that would encounter a lot of prep with especially the landing part. There were times when we landed in fields. There were times when we landed in a nearby parking lot. There were times when we landed on a road that was only big enough for a car and a half. At one time, I landed on a road and slid sideways to center myself on a road. The power lines weren't far away from me, but we missed them, got the patient, and got back to the hospital. That's a dangerous business, and there's lots of accidents that have happened in the past. But thankfully that Parkview Hospital was very concerned about safety, and if you thought that there was anything that would go wrong with that particular flight, that you shouldn't go, they never said a word about it. When I joined the military, going in after my brother got drafted, I was kind of directed into aviation. I went through their initial tests and passed those, and then they said they would send me for another test, which was actually an aviation test. I believe I passed that aviation test with some credit given to the ride I took with Jim Peterson originally. The attitudes of the aircraft and the attitudes of the instruments inside the aircraft kind of were familiar with me, with my memory of his flight and where we went. So from that point, they accepted me into the Warrant Officer Flight Training School. I went through Fort Walters, Texas for the initial training, and at that time they were going advanced training to Hunter Army Airfield in Georgia. So I did the advanced training there. When I graduated from there, I became an officer and got my flight wings. My brother was still in the military. He was just coming back from Vietnam. After I graduated, they would have sent me straight to Vietnam, but since he was still over there at that particular time, they sent me to Fort Riley, Kansas. Fort Riley, Kansas had a small aviation group there, and I was able to fly a couple of different helicopter styles there. But after my brother got back, they came to me and says, "You're going." So they sent me to Alabama, to Fort Rucker, which is the main helicopter training area for the Army. And I went through an instructor course there. And then after that, I went straight over to Vietnam. In Vietnam, I was attached to a headquarters group, so I did a lot of different types of flying. Once you got over there and got accustomed to the heat and all the activities, you pretty much knew where you were going because the guy who was there before you, he was also telling you what is what and what goes on. And during that time, I flew lots of different commanders. I flew medevacs runs, and I flew inserts and extractions with troops. There was some gunfire all the time. You got to expect that over there. I did lose a couple friends while I was over there, but fortunately, I was back without getting too much damage. When I got back, that was 1972. The search and extract, or the rescue missions, lots of times we'd be flying around. In one particular instance, we saw some red smoke, which over there meant that there was a problem. So we looked around to see what's going on. The red smoke was coming from one of the ground areas where we thought our people were working. Got on the radios, started calling a bunch of different people, and finally got a hold of the ground unit. Talked to them, and we realized at that point that there was actually our people instead of the Vietnamese, which sometimes would pop red smoke in order to get somebody to come in so they could shoot them. So we did land, and it just so happened that one of the Special Forces people had stepped on a booby trap and had his legs blown off from the knee down. So we threw him on the helicopter and went just as fast as we could to the nearest hospital. The crew chiefs in the back took their belts off, put the tourniquets on, and probably saved the man's life. When I was in Vietnam, I always flew Hueys. I did have an opportunity to fly in a Cobra, but while I was in Kansas, I got an escort duty, which was a gentleman who had been in Vietnam and was killed in action. Generally, they will have a family member escort him from where he comes into country to his home, or they'll have an equal ranking individual escort them, equal or higher. I was picked because I was new at Kansas, at Fort Riley, so I drew the short straw, I guess. But I picked up the gentleman in Pennsylvania and flew with him to Mound, Minnesota, and took him back to his mother. His mother said he'd been gone for 10 days. Aircraft that I have owned, according to the Champ I mentioned also the Cherokee 180. When I was working in Rochester, they had a group there that had 4 airplanes. At that point, I sold my share in the Cherokee and joined their club down there, which overall was a little cheaper. Their flight time was more costly, but the overall cost was cheaper. So I flew some Cessna 172s down there, sold the Cherokee, and a wife still wishes I had the Cherokee back. We've thought several times about getting into a group with 4 or 5 people and a 4-passenger airplane, which the Champ is only 2, but just haven't done that yet. I run into a gentleman the other day who has a friend who has a helicopter, and I says, well, if he needs a part-time helicopter co-pilot, I'd help him out. So he said he'd arrange a meeting. At this point, at my age, I'm not going to get back into a career of aviation, but anytime I get the opportunity to fly something different, it's fun. It's fun, and I would have a lot of enjoyment doing that. When I got the group together to purchase the Champ from Jim Peterson, we kept Jim Peterson as a silent partner in the group for 2 years before he said he wanted to get out. And at the time, I asked the other 4 people that were involved in this group to take Jim for a ride. I believe a couple of them did, but not very often. I continued to fly with him until he decided he wanted out, and then we cashed in his final share. But still, in the tradition of what he started, I give rides to a lot of people. I did a school program with a gentleman who was looking at the career in aviation, and he followed me around for about a week, on and off for about a week, went to different locations, went back down to Samaritan since I was retired at the time. It was a special trip down to Samaritan to see the helicopter and show him the business down there. We stopped at a couple of places that had simulators and looked at those, and then always everybody gets a ride in the Champ. I took relatives for a ride, and for a while the Aero Club was doing rides for a wine gathering group. We'd get together once a year with the wine group at the Aero Club, and they had volunteers from the Aero Club come out and give everybody there a ride in an aircraft. It stimulated a lot of interest in the airport itself. Some of them didn't even know the airport was here, and it stimulated a lot of interest in flying. But then, of course, after everybody took a ride, then they started drinking wine. And it was a fun night. The airport here has provided a platform for a lot of people to come out and take a look at aviation. We've had some gatherings here with lots of different people, lots of different aircraft. And we had the Samaritan people come up one time, and it was a breakfast. But the Aero Club was putting on the breakfast, and the Parkview Samaritan helicopter came up. So since I was retired at the time, they went and ate breakfast, and I stood around the helicopter and talked to all the people. The kids would come up, and we'd set them in the seat for a while, and they'd look at all the instruments in front of them and think, how will I ever do this? And I would say, how did you ever first start riding a bicycle? It just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of working and a little bit of studying. Eventually it'll work. Airport providing all these opportunities, I got to meet a lot of different people out here. Even back when I was in the military with the National Guard in Michigan. At one point, they were dedicating a Vietnam War memorial out in Fox Park. So they asked for helicopters to do a flyover, and I volunteered. Luckily, the Guard unit up in Michigan agreed. We brought 3 helicopters down Friday night, and of course, it stirred a lot of interest because the Huey helicopters, make a lot of noise. So we circled the town one time and then came in and landed at the airport. By the time we got to the airport, there was probably 100 people lined up along the fences. So we parked the helicopters, did our little routines and parked the helicopters, and then opened up one of them and opened up the gate. Boy, the people came running out, the kids came running out. Everybody climbed in and out of the helicopters, and all the crew members would sit and talk to them about it and tell war stories or answer questions from the curious little kids. The next day, we cranked up and they were dedicating the war memorial, so we had a particular time we had to fly over. And we lined up and dedicated that Vietnam War memorial, and then flew back to Michigan. This aviation career has served me well. It's probably the best job I've had with the most money I have ever made. And as far as advice for somebody to get into this, if it's your passion to fly, by all means do it, because it is very rewarding. And if it's not your passion, like mine, I didn't really have a whole lot of passion until I took that first ride, and then it kind of died out after that first ride when I was 13 years old. But it reignited once I was fully graduated into a helicopter pilot. So if you go out and you take a ride and you enjoy it, pursue it. Maybe not a career, but it's a great hobby also.